I left my parents' home after high school, went for college, and never looked back. In part because I never wanted to and because they never reached out. My family had always been an odd one, never really in contact with the extended family members. I think I only met my grandparents when I was 3. Found out my mum had siblings when I was 10. It never seemed weird back then. It was a family. What I knew as one at least. A mother, a father, and a child. Everyone else was acquaintances more than relatives. Estranged friends more than family. Of course, I saw that other kids had it different. It was always weird when my friends were picked up by grandparents and aunts after school. It always felt like they were going with a stranger, and I was taught early on to never go with strangers. I grew up in this kind of home. The home where your parents are civil with one another, like friends would be. Where love isn't really a word with any meaning, just like family wasn't. That doesn't mean they were cold. They just put more emphasis on appreciation and respect. Either way around. They prepared me for life and for the life without them, and I'm thankful that they did. All the more odd it was to find a letter with my home address in my mailbox one day. There were stickers on it, glitter, a green and red rim. It smelled heavily of cinnamon, as if someone had tossed it in the oven with a couple of 100 sticks for a few hours. I will admit, I didn't dare open it for a couple of days. Honestly, I was worried that there was a bunch of glitter poured in there that I would have to spend the next 5 years of my life attempting to get out of my apartment. And I didn't know what to expect. My parents hadn't called, texted, emailed, anything since I left. I never expected them to either. I didn't need them, and they didn't need me. But now, they sent a letter. Or someone did, claiming their address to pull some stupid prank on me. I waited until the end of the week, just in case there was indeed glitter stuffed into that envelope, so I had time to get rid of it, instead of living in it and carrying it around everywhere, including to work. It was a Christmas card. I hadn't even really been aware that it was just around the corner until the card arrived. It was never something I particularly paid attention to. Neither had they, so it was really an odd thing for them to invite me over for the holidays. I don't know why I took them up on it, honestly. Maybe some form of weird nostalgic sentiment. Maybe a sense of debt. Or the respect they taught me when I was younger. I know people who always say that they felt like they were coming home when they went back to the house that they grew up in, that it brought a sense of safety, of calm, an escape from their daily responsibilities. And I honestly can't say I felt the same when I stood in front of that house again. It seemed smaller than when I left, seemed strange, foreign, like something I had never seen before. Maybe that was because of the bright blinking lights cluttering the facade that my parents had always refused even painting anything but white. There was a glowing reindeer set up out front, a sleigh and a Christmas tree, all sorts of decorations slapped onto it, as if someone had just stuffed a holiday department into a box and dumped it over their front yard. There were speakers somewhere, the sound of ringing bells out of a bush I never remembered to be there. Some Christmas song most stores would put on around this time of year coming from another. It wasn't the first or last time for that trip that I would question whether this invitation had really been sent by my parents. Whether this was really still their house. I hesitated to go inside. And then, for a moment, I did feel like a kid again. The same kid who wanted to stay outside longer. Who wanted to go back to practice rather than take one step closer to that door. Who wanted to stay with their friends, but never could because they had families instead of providers, who they would spend time with after school. I don't think I moved until the door opened and she appeared. My mother, her hair much shorter than I remembered it being. She had dyed it darker to hide the greying, but it was obvious at her roots. She looked older, had wrinkles in her face and age marks on her skin. But those were not the things that alienated her from me, that made her seem like a woman I had never met. It was the bright apron tied around her waist, the oven mitts still in her hands, and most of all, the bright smile on her lips when she opened her arms to welcome me. She beckoned me closer, her lips forming the word sharply. My name. And still, not me. She folded her arms around me the moment I got close enough, thin appendages pressing into my sides, trapping my arms against my body. I didn't move until she let go and closed the door behind me. The house smelled like cookies, fresh baking and a warm meal. It was brighter than it had been in my childhood. The corners I had never dared to go were filled with candlelight now. My father was sitting on the couch reading, and he looked up when we came in, put what he was doing aside to greet me. I had never seen either of them so happy to see me, so eager to have me with them. It felt like I stepped into the wrong movie. My mother rushed into the kitchen mumbling something about her casserole, leaving me behind with her father, looking like he expected something of me. He sat me down, started talking, asking about my life. They had always taken an interest, but it had always been a polite one, asking about successes, about things I never wanted to tell them, never pushing or prodding for anything. This time, I felt put on the spot, stuck in an interrogation. And he just smiled on like there was nothing wrong, like he hadn't just asked a practical stranger he hadn't seen in almost 10 years for their relationship status, or their ambitions, dreams, and anything personal you could think of, really. The candles were flickering, splotches of darkness moving about in the corners of my eyes. The thought came as if automatic, as if something studied for years. There's nothing there. I didn't even notice that thought until the shadows moved again. But this time, I felt compelled to check on the twitching in the corners of my eyes. The light danced about as peacefully as ever, moved over an empty chair pointed at the wall, and a cabinet sat right beside it. Not a single corner was unlit, not a crook left dark. I was tired, is what it must have been. I was exhausted from the drive and needed to rest. I excused myself, and for a moment, my father seemed disappointed. No, the flash that went through his eyes was something else. I couldn't quite place it. I still can't. But he got up with me, helped me carry my bags upstairs, back to my old room. It was still untouched, left the way it was when I moved out. I took most of my things along back then, leaving a bed and a couple of toys I felt I had grown out of, a meagerly packed bookshelf, and a single cabinet that could hold the few clothes that I brought. But somehow, I didn't feel like unpacking. It started snowing the first night I was there. I noticed when it did, because I woke up. There was a clicking somewhere in my room. Slow and irregular, but always sets of twos, somewhat close together. It wasn't loud, not particularly, but enough to disturb my sleep. I've never been a heavy sleeper. Not in this house, at least. There was always something. A ticking, a clock, a dripping faucet or a gust of wind that would wake me up in the middle of the night. It would always be dark when I set foot on the ground. My only light source were the street lamps outside my window, because my parents never allowed me a nightlight. The entire house was dark when I stepped out into the hallway. No, I never got out of bed when I was here. No, I would wake up, but I would always stay in bed. I would watch the window just like I did that night. Watch for stars or shadows of passing cars. Would curl further into my blankets and closer against the wall. Until I finally fell asleep again. Now, when I watched the window, I could see the silhouette of snowflakes. Thick dots of grey, quickly turning to white when they hit the glass. They stuck, and I watched them crystallize. Their intricate shapes becoming obvious for just a moment. And then I heard the click again. It seemed closer than it had when I was still asleep. Somewhere in my room. I frowned at first, because there was nothing with me that should be making any noise. I had never had a clock in my room, the only one in the house being the big grandfather clock my parents still had in their living room. I couldn't hear that from all the way up here. My phone was silent. Always was when I was off work, and it was on my bedside table too close for the noise. Another click, and my eyes snapped over to where I heard it coming from. I froze when I saw them. The eyes, catching the light of the street lamp in the corner of my room. A couple of feet off the floor, high enough to span the distance of a man, fixed fully on me, unmoving, unblinking. I stopped breathing for a moment, as if that could hide me better. My hand clenched into my bedsheets. It was quiet, so much so I could hear the blood rushing through my veins, my heart beating unsteadily. I begged them to be quieter, but they wouldn't listen. My eyes slowly started getting used to the darkness that those eyes were hidden in. More and more features framing them slowly coming into view. A grey, tattered skin, shimmering in parts, wrinkled to a point beyond recognition in others. The rough shape of a nose bent and crooked, as if broken in the middle. A mouth, more a gaping hole standing wide open. Light reflected from the wetness that covered it. Teeth, only marked by whatever was flowing over them, scattered throughout the hole. Something dripped from his lips onto the ground. I allowed my eyes to follow it, down towards his feet. Click. Again. And again. And again. I looked back up, only for it to stop, long enough to catch my attention. And then it moved. His eyes, blinking, slowly, one after the other. Click. Click. My entire body seemed to tense up. My heart beat harder, quicker in my chest. A light flashed up in the corner of my room, a roar from a car out on the street. The shadows of snowflakes thrown against my wall. But it didn't stay still. The beam of the headlights thrown in through my window began rushing across the wall, closer and closer towards the figure in the corner, towards the eyes that wouldn't stop blinking. I wanted to run, but he was by the door. The reflex kicked in before I could realize. I sat up, and the eyes darted forward. Heavy steps, pounding on the ground. The light reached it, flashed up the face that came so close, and then it disappeared. Along with it, the figure. And I was left clinging onto my sheets, breathing harder than it was good for me in a room at least a few degrees below freezing. I don't think I slept again that night. I don't remember falling asleep, definitely not trying to. I remember sitting in bed. I remember lighting up the room with a flashlight of my phone, watching the snowflakes fall and slowly coat the ground outside. But I did wake up again. It was the ringing of the grandfather clock, the heavy gong that sounded 7 a.m. I could barely sit up, Barely wanted to open my eyes again now that they were closed. But when I did, my room was empty. Except for the teddy bear sitting in the corner that I had seen the figure in, on top of the bookshelf where I had never set anything else. I heard the house moving, my parents bustling about downstairs, the kitchen, clanking dishes, and something sizzling. The smell only reached me when I opened the hallway door. Lights had been set up in every room, every hallway and the stairwell. Colourful fairy lights, soft tunes of Christmas music sounding through the entire house. I had dreamt of something like this when I was younger, after I had seen other families celebrating Christmas on TV. I had dreamt of the decorated house, of presents, the illusion of Santa. Even if the thought of someone breaking into our house in the middle of the night made me feel a little uneasy. The air was filled with the smell of bacon and sausages, and my stomach rumbled when I took a step outside my bedroom door. But the moment I leant against the handrail at the stairwell, a sharp pain shot through my entire arm. And when I pulled up my sleeve, I saw a bruise the size and almost shape of a palm wrapped around it. Tiniest blood vessels dancing around the underneath of my skin, paling after they sent a shot of blood through them. It pooled where they were broken, pushed out directly underneath my skin. A web of blue and purple spanning over the spot, still bright. But I knew it would darken and expand. I used to have them a lot, bruises, when I was younger. I never really questioned it. No one did. Not my parents, or my teachers. I was an active kid, sports ranging from football to gymnastics and dancing. I would play around outside as much as I could. But it never really stopped until I moved out. The broken vessels underneath my skin appearing seemingly at random in places I started being sure I'd never even touched within the last days. I was tired back then. Moving was painful. It was slow, difficult, exhausting. I dropped a sport or another activity, hoped that I wouldn't get hurt so much, that I had more time to rest. But it didn't help. Not really. Nothing ever really seemed to. My mum seemed to actually make an effort going towards the holidays. She set up breakfast, lunch, cake and coffee around the afternoon and a nice dinner in the evening. I don't think I ever saw her out of the kitchen. And when she came out, she would still be wearing that apron and the oven mitts, as if expecting to have to rush back and grab something from the oven any second. Even when we were eating, she was preparing something for the next meal. Jumped up every couple of minutes to go back to the kitchen. She refused my help when I asked her around dinner time. I started to notice that when I tried to make my way towards the kitchen, someone would conveniently step in my way. Distract me. Lead me away. It was snowing all day. Had enough already for the streets to be covered in white. For most of the day, we sat in the living room. My mum kept providing us with tea, coffee, hot chocolate, anything that would counter the cold that crept into the house, and that what our minds played for us when we watched the snow fall. I think I got used to it, a little at least. The festive peace at my parents' house. They stayed up longer than me after dinner, stayed behind in the living room. Old fairy tale movies running on the TV, the obnoxiously colourful Christmas tree blinking away in the corner. I mostly left because my eyes couldn't stand it any longer. The flickering from one corner, clashing with what was in the other. Moving pictures I was trying my best to concentrate on in the middle. I don't know how they endured it for so long, how they seemed to do it for who knew how long up to Christmas. But my head was pounding when I finally went back upstairs. I almost forgot, over the day. Almost forgot the eyes that had me fixed the night before. The figure in the corner of my room. It was only when my hand was almost touching the light switch that I remembered, that I almost heard the click again. I felt a cold shiver running down my back, all but cringed away from the light switch and turned back into the room, leaving the light on this time. We still had breakfast together the next morning, the morning of Christmas Eve. I'd never known my parents to be religious people. Well, we never talked about these kinds of things. Beliefs, wants, dreams. But I know when I was younger, they never went to church. Not on Sundays, not for Easter or Christmas, or any other holiday you might go out to practice your faith. Now, everything became about getting ready after breakfast, picking out the best modest but wealthy outfits. My mum did her hair and makeup, finally left the kitchen for a little bit. "You don't need to come along." She wasn't even looking at me when she said it, just at herself in the mirror, fixing the last bits of her hair. "It's just become a tradition for us." She said the service would be about an hour, but they would most likely be gone for longer than that, catching up with friends, people they had gotten to know, the community. And then she gave me that smile, the same she had on her lips when I first arrived, almost as if she was expecting something of me. The Christmas music was still playing when they left. I could barely manage to figure out what speaker it was coming out of, much less what device was sending it out or which of the million plugs I'd have to pull to get it to stop. At least I could get the Christmas tree in the living room to stop blinking for long enough to not need a seizure warning anymore. For a while, I just sat in front of the TV, tried to tune out the Christmas music with some trashy shows. This is what had always been my Christmas after all. I might have been 10 minutes in, might have been half an hour. I always lost my time watching these kinds of things. But it took me quite a while before I noticed that there shouldn't be any noises that were supposed to be coming from upstairs. That my parents weren't getting themselves busy with work, walking from one room to the other, and opening every door in their path. A click, the airy hum of a door pushed from its frame, heavy steps on the hard floors. But the moment I turned off the TV sounds to pay attention to those in the house, they stopped, so abruptly that I thought I had only imagined them. They started slowly again. A couple of steps, a creak, the sound of that one step I learned to avoid when I got a glass of water at night. I turned off the sounds of the TV again and turned around. But the house was empty. The fairy lights wrapped around the handrail of the stairwell flickered, buzzed, as if they were breaking, and finally turned off. I hesitated, but got up slowly. There they were again. Steps. Someone walking down the hallway just upstairs. My eyes wandered towards the door, still closed tightly, and the empty parking lot I could see just out of the frosted-over living room window. Another step, at the top of the stairs. My blood ran cold, as if the temperature suddenly dropped by a couple of degrees. Every hair on my body stood up. The Christmas music played on, as if there wasn't something incredibly off, as if I couldn't feel the breath down my neck. I moved as if on autopilot, found myself halfway up the stairs before I came back to my senses, and I was already in the upstairs hallway when I gained control over my body again. The music was a lot quieter up here, muffled by the distance, echoing lightly through the empty rooms, their doors standing wide open into the hallway. The lights had gone out on the entire upper floor. No more blinking, no more colours vomited all over the walls. For a moment, it looked almost calm, the way I knew it. For a moment. Until the shadow moved at the other end of the hall. The same uncertain shape, the same unmoving figure. It was as if I was staring into a mirror, a sick game of blink first that I had never gotten a choice of opting out of. I tried my best to stay still, barely winced when the first door slammed behind me. I watched it tilt its head to the side, more and more until its neck cracked, and with one more push broke through, leaving the head free to twist further. The next door slammed so hard, so close to me, that I could feel the gust of air it pushed against me. Another door fell, and another, quicker and harder. The bangs so loud my ears started ringing. Or maybe it was just the jingling bells from every single damn Christmas song. Until the last two slammed at the same time right behind him. He stayed quiet. I did too for a moment, letting my ears hear the music again instead of that ghastly whine that the loud bangs had left behind. But what I heard was a heartbeat, my own, pounding in my ears. The breath that seemed far too loud, that he should be able to hear, to notice as well. He turned his head further, let the broken vertebrae of his neck crack until his head sat upside down on his chest. I could hear them popping, every single one, this horrible, echoing crack. I turned my head when I heard the car door outside. A single second of relief, followed by regret. His neck popped back into place in an instant, and he shot forward. I think I let out a scream, but I couldn't hear anything. Nothing as I was dragged down the stairs except the dull thuds of my legs crashing against every step, of my bones starting to crack under the constant pounding. The house disappeared before my eyes. The blinking seemed all red, the music like a siren. Then my head crashed into something, and everything went black. It was cold, the ground below me. Harder than it should have been too. I noticed it the second I woke up. And still, it took me a surprising amount of time to figure out that I was not, in fact, in my bed. It was a kitchen, not the one I grew up in. It was older, more traditional. But I recognized the apron, the oven mitts thrown over the handle of the oven door. Not, however, the bare-footed steps making their way over the tiled floor. A wet smacking, a dark puddle left behind by every step as he tore his foot back off the ground, leaving what little skin he had left behind. He was humming as he moved. It was a Christmas song, the same one that had been playing a week before. A weak, breathy voice echoing it through the kitchen. It was dark. The curtains were wide open, but the world behind them had gone out. Snow was still falling, dark still against the darker background. I couldn't move, much less get up from my curled-up position on the ground. The tiles felt like ice, and the cold used every chance it got to crawl into my body, but I couldn't do anything against it. I tried to turn my head, to look up, at least turn my eyes towards the figure walking through the kitchen. The only thing I managed to do was extend my little finger, the tiniest scrape of my nail against the ground. He stopped, suddenly, went silent, and his feet slowly turned to face me. I had an imaginary friend when I was younger. That's what everyone called it. This thing I talked to. I never considered it a friend. I haven't thought about it in years. Not since I left my parents' house. I don't think I would have been able to remember if I tried. Now, he never had a name. Not one he told me anyways. He was silent, and I was the only one who ever saw him. I knew I was, no matter how much my parents tried to pretend to include my friend, no matter how often a kid at school claimed he was their friend too, only to walk into thin air. I saw him when he was lurking in the dark corners of our house. A shadow, a silhouette that would suddenly disappear when I turned to face him, after I had endured and tried to ignore the dark shape in the corner of my eyes for so long, after I had let him grow so much that I thought my eyesight might be going. He never fully blinded me in the end, and the only times he actually let me see him was when I woke up on the kitchen floor in the middle of the night. Thinking about it now, maybe he was the reason I had so many things going on in my childhood. So many activities that kept me away from home as long as possible. He bent down real slow. His bones cracked with the twisting movement fighting against it. But he had more control than they did. His face came into view slowly, right next to his feet, still pointing straight at me. Those eyes again, the same that had watched me sleep at night, that had watched me since I was young. His face was fallen in, a flap of skin loosened off his cheek, fell up towards his eyes, covering one to reveal the rotten teeth behind them. He looked slashed up, like he had taken a knife to the face, a gash deep enough to show bone just below his bloodshot eye. There were maggots feasting on his flesh, burrowing underneath his skin, in his eyes. The hole seemed to close up when his face twisted into a psychopathic grin, the maggots gone from my sight. But I could still hear them, wriggling in his skin, munching through the flesh as if it was nothing. That was the same moment the blade popped up, the kitchen knife, sharp and shiny, fresh from my mother's knife block in his bony hand. I saw my reflection in it, the empty eyes, the frozen face. And then I saw her, my mother, standing in the door, watching with that apologetic look on her face, clutching a dish towel in her hands. It must have been that gave me the strength to reach out, to snatch the knife from whatever was in front of me, straighten up and wave it around. But the only thing the knife cut through was air. The figure that had folded itself in half to grin down at me had disappeared, and I wouldn't wait for it to come back and finish whatever the hell it had planned on doing. I left before Christmas Day had even really started, packed my things that same night, and went out to my car while it was still dark. I sure as hell didn't want to stay a minute longer than I had to in that house. I looked back one more time when I had started the car. My mother was standing at the window, a pained look in her eyes, a towel in her hands, her fingers nervously cramped around it, pulling and tearing at the fabric. A hand came from behind to grasp her shoulder, hold it tightly, and she closed her eyes. When I started driving off, I could see my father standing in the upstairs window. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredeverell.com. If you want to support me even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can buy me a coffee on my Ko-fi account. Link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. Or head over to Audible, where there is a book Punch by J.R. Park that I narrated. Thanks again for watching, and Merry Christmas.